Hi, I'm Mark Banicevich, and welcome to Governance Bites. Today, it's my pleasure to host David Ireland, who is a partner at Dentons Kensington Swan, a major international law firm. His specialties in financial services, and so through his career, he's advised executive committees and boards of banks and insurers and other large financial institutions. And he's also had governance experience in a personal capacity, both in professional corporate organizations and also in sports organizations. Like David, we're both involved in minority sports at a governance level and have experience both at the local New Zealand level and at the international level. So a really fascinating person to discuss this topic with. Unfortunately, we can't do this in person because David's based in Wellington and I'm based in Auckland. And when he comes up to Auckland next week, I'm working in Christchurch. So thank you very much for your time over the internet today, David.
You're welcome, Mark. Pleasure to have a chat.
As a starting point, probably to set the framework a little bit, could you explain a little bit about the difference between governance and management?
Okay. Yeah, an interesting question. It is one of probably the big challenges, I think, for volunteer organizations of actually getting that distinction right. And to me, governance is about setting the strategic direction of the organization, right? Setting the policy framework. What are we trying to achieve? How are we going to go about doing it? So setting that design in place for how is this organization going to be successful? How is it going to grow? Management is then implementing that governance decisions, the strategy. So management is about the coal face, rolling your sleeves up and doing the actual work. So management about implementing, governance about deciding what it is they're going to do. And important, I think, for governing bodies to be aware of that distinction or very conscious of that distinction and make sure that they are focusing on what really matters to the organization, which is that strategic direction.
Oh, thank you. So with sports organizations in particular, often populated by volunteers and people that are passionate about the sport, so really very much in the detailed frame, what are the challenges that you see, particularly with your experience of the contrast between governance at a corporate level and governance at a sporting level, the challenges of making sure governance happens in a sporting organization rather than having a bunch of volunteers that are really keen on the minutiae of detail?
Well, I think you've hit it on the head there, right? That it's actually driven by volunteers. They're passionate about what they want to do, and they've got, probably a history of actually just getting on and doing it to make sure stuff happens, right? They'll be passionately interested at the actual implementation level of enjoying the sport and making sure that happens, right? With a lot of the structures that you end up saying, so these passionate people then get elevated up to an executive committee type structure, right? They've got the time, they've got the passion, they've got the interest and want to then run things. The danger is you just have just a management grouping that are focused on implementing, but not actually lifting their heads up to focus on strategy of actually, getting above, the current year's operations, what you're doing to make sure things happen this month, and thinking actually, well, how's it going to be successful next year in 5 years' time, 10 years' time? What are we doing broadly? What are the broader dynamics that this organization needs to be aware of to be a continuing success? And so whilst you absolutely need that passion of the individuals involved, to be driving it, sometimes that passion can get in the way of your strategic direction. And just it is a constant battle for all these organizations of the likes of New Zealand Handball Federation and other sort of minority sports organizations just to get that balance right. Because you've got a really small pool of individuals, right, who are looking after it, trying to do things, and quite hard to separate it yourself out from doing it to then just making sure it gets done.
And you don't have the budget or the reputation to pull in experienced directors to come in and help you govern that entity. As a minority sport, you haven't got the pulling power, have you, or the budget to pay people to come in and do that, help you with that work.
Yeah, I want one day you would like to get to that point. And I think for any organisation having a bit of external objective expertise of looking at it can help, because we can all get caught up with our own individual, pet focuses of actually what we want to drive individually as being somebody at the coalface of the sport, versus actually what makes the most sense from a strategic direction. And that's where perhaps an external voice of a professional person or just somebody who is interested generally in governance can help just hold people to account and make sure that good objective decisions are being made.
So, as somebody who has that knowledge and that capability, being brought onto the board or the executive, in this case of the New Zealand Handball Federation, how do you recommend that a sports organisation with those sorts of passionate people that don't necessarily have a governance background, how do you try to elevate them to governance? What do you think is involved in making that happen to help people become aware of their role in strategy and policy and so forth?
Yeah, and really an interesting question, and it is an eternal challenge, and won't pretend that it is easy, because you do want to still harness that passion of the individuals to be involved, and you're feeding off their experience of what actually works in practice. And what we've tried to do at the New Zealand Handball Federation is make sure it's very clear we do have clear spaces where we are just being the governing body and we're focusing on strategy and operating as a genuine governing body to look at those strategic issues, key policies we need to get in place, looking at our interface with the international body. So we'll have like a meeting set aside, whether it's one a quarter or every second meeting, just depending on what is actually happening going on, of looking at that strategic side. And then other meetings, we will actually clearly identify this is a management meeting, because it's a lot of it is the same people involved who are governing as well as doing. But at the management type meetings, we're focusing primarily just on implementing the strategy and looking at, well, what are we doing to put in place the strategic decisions that we have made at the previous meeting, and try and keep that distinction. I found that has been quite effective for us, and it's always going to be a little bit of crossover, just because you've got the same small group of individuals doing things. But it is, I find really important to take time away from the coalface, away from just being in the weeds and implementing, to step back and make sure you've got a good governance session where those charged with the future for the organisation are actually spending some time to look at how it is all being run, sort of that helicopter view of the sport. What do we need to do to make sure that our sport grows and is successful, not just this year but in the years to come.
Right. Yes, we were lucky in international taekwondo in New Zealand. Just under about 20 years ago, we migrated from an executive committee structure to a board of directors structure. So we have got now that separation of governance from management, and now we've got a strong board in place with a good chair and a good CEO that are really running well with that distinction. You mentioned before that the New Zealand Handball Federation has got an executive committee structure, and when we were talking earlier, you told me that the International Federation has a governance structure. What sort of differences do you see between the way those two organisations run, in the way that you communicate with the international entity and the way the international entity makes decisions, and the effectiveness of what it does with the luxury of having a governance structure in the international level?
Yeah, sure. A lot of it comes down to the amount of financial resources involved that help support that, right? Yeah. And for us as a national body, so we will just be an executive committee will be liaising with the the employees, those at the coalface at the management level of the International Handball Federation. So we would very seldom elevate up to engage with the governing body. So the governing body sort of sits one step removed from the day-to-day operational aspect, and instead they are focusing on broader, what is in the interests of handball internationally, how does it work, what are the right policies to have in place, and they will be looking at that. But they have their employees are charged then with delivering, implementing all of those policies that are put in place, and act as the conduit between all the member federations and that governing body. But in general, almost your ideal point would be management actually deals with everything, and the governing body does not need to then drop down and get involved, other than at your annual meetings and your formal events, and does not meet, as I understand it, on a daily basis. If it's there, it's more they will jump in, have their key strategic meetings, and then drop out because they've got the confidence in their employed staff to actually deliver on what needs to happen at a management level.
And that's the key role of the board of directors, right? To hold management to account, to follow that implementation, to tackle problems as they arise, and give management support in doing so. Yes, it's a really interesting migration. And as you say, it would be lovely if we as minority sports could have the resources to put in place the strong governance structures and separate management teams and so forth, and have the resources underneath us and paid employees to be able to implement the strategy. Now, this is a change of sport moving more towards a corporate governance model, right? And corporate governance has been around for a long time. It's an international discipline that's fairly standard around the world. Why do you think that sport is moving towards a corporate governance model? What are the advantages of this style of corporate governance that makes it this thing that everyone aspires to?
What is a combination of factors, I think, but is the increased professionalism of the way organizations operate. You might call it it's just a feature of evolution, right? Things are then improving as you get larger, and you realize that actually the individuals who are doing all the work are getting more and more work to do. Actually, how do you manage that? How do you harness it? Moving to the corporate governance structure is a clearly well proven, established approach to running any organization, of actually trying to make sure that there is a group there that oversees what's happening, that can hold those to account who are charged with doing things, and are not completely distracted all the time by actually getting in there and doing it themselves. And I think it's that trying to get away from the distraction and the pressure of trying to implement what it is that's been decided. That is a key thing you're trying to achieve, or a key objective from a board, right? Of actually harnessing the capabilities of people, making sure that they are directed in the right place to get the best value out of the organization, and clearly distinguishing roles, which you find is the best way to get the most out of all the individuals involved.
Right. Yes. Thank you. And I guess there's also an element that without that kind of governance level of conversation happening, there can be a lack of setting strategy at all. And there's that old quote from the Cheshire Cat in Alice in Wonderland: if you don't know where you're going, how will you get there? So I think there's an element of that in governance, that taking the time and to dedicate to thinking about where you're going to go. Whereas if all you're doing is managing, then that day-to-day happens, but you don't got no direction.
Yeah, well, and yet another base analogy you look at is, I think, as say an executive committee type function, where there's a lot of management oversight. You end up spending one of the risks is you spend all your time fighting fires, and you're just putting out the fires without actually having the time to step back and work out what's causing the fires and how do we stop fires happening in the future, because you're so focused there at dealing with what's immediately in front of you, that you don't actually have the time. And things can function reasonably or seemingly effectively by taking that approach, right? That you're just dealing with what's in front of you. This is what we've always done. This is how we do it. And you're just crunching through that. But that tends to be a recipe for, I don't want to say stagnation, but you struggle to then move forward, because you will just keep doing the same things that you're doing with just little tweaks at the end. If you want to make a transformational change, or actually get some real coherence in your direction, you need to somehow get away from just fighting the fires and dealing with the day-to-day, and look at, well, actually, do we even need to fight this fire? Are there other things that we should be doing? Are we actually going in the right direction? It's just trying to get your head out of all that detail and look forward. And that's where, a clearly distinguished governance body that's just focused on governance for when it meets, or clearly identifying when they're doing that, can be gold for any organization and critical, I think, to the ongoing success.
Cool. Okay, David, thank you very much for your time. I really appreciate it. I look forward to catching up with you next time we're in the same city. And I'll look forward to seeing everybody else next episode. Thank you very much for your time.
Yes, mate. All the best.